You've probably seen it. A Disney quote shows up on your feed. Maybe it's Mufasa telling Simba that the past can hurt, but you can choose to learn from it. Maybe it's Dory saying, "Just keep swimming." Maybe it's that Winnie the Pooh line about being braver than you believe. And something stops you. You read it twice, you feel it somewhere behind your ribs, and then you wonder, a little embarrassed maybe, why is a cartoon quote making me emotional? Psychologists have a very specific answer for that. And it's not just nostalgia. It's not just that you loved these movies as a kid. It's something much more concrete, something happening inside the brain. And once you understand it, you'll never watch a movie with your child the same way again. And here's the thing, that reaction you're having isn't weakness. It isn't just nostalgia. It isn't you being sentimental about your childhood. It is your nervous system doing something very specific. Retrieving an emotional memory that was encoded decades ago and is still, to this day, sitting in your brain as a functioning psychological resource. The science behind why that happens is one of the most useful things a parent can understand. Because if it happened to you, it is happening to your child right now. Here's where we need to start. Children's brains are not smaller versions of adult brains. They're fundamentally different in how they process and store experience. In early and middle childhood, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, analysis, skepticism, is still years away from maturity. What is highly active during this window is the limbic system, the emotional processing center of the brain. And what that means, practically, is that children don't receive stories the way adults do. They don't sit back and evaluate. They absorb. Developmental psychologists call this the open encoding state. When a child is engaged in a story, their brain is not filing the experience under fiction. It's filing it under felt. The emotions triggered by a character's courage or fear or loss are processed as real emotional events. The neural pathways that fire are the same ones that fire during actual lived experience. This is why a child can cry at a fictional lion dying. The brain in that moment is not distinguishing between the story and reality. This is also the mechanism behind something called narrative transportation, a concept that has been studied extensively by psychologists like Melanie Green and Timothy Brock. Narrative transportation is the state of being fully drawn into a story, and research shows that the more transported a person is, the more the story's messages become integrated into their actual beliefs and values. In adults, this happens to varying degrees. In children, whose critical defenses are not yet built, it happens almost completely. So what does that mean for your child sitting cross-legged in front of Kung Fu Panda? It means that when Master Oogway looks at Po and says, "Yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift," that phrase is not landing in the entertainment folder. It's landing in the identity folder. It's going somewhere deep, and it's going to stay there. Now let's talk about specific quotes, because this is where it gets really interesting and really useful for you as a parent. Take the Winnie the Pooh line. "You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think." On the surface, it sounds like something you'd put on a motivational poster. But look at it through the lens of developmental psychology. What this quote is actually encoding is a specific kind of self-concept, what researchers call an incremental self-theory. This is the belief that your abilities and your courage are not fixed. They're not a ceiling you were born with. There's something that exists in you, perhaps more than you currently recognize. Carol Dweck at Stanford has spent decades studying how children's beliefs about their own abilities shape their trajectories. Children who hold an incremental self-theory, who believe they have untapped capacity, show dramatically greater persistence in the face of difficulty. They try harder after setbacks. They interpret failure as a signal to adjust, not as evidence of limitation. And the fascinating part is that this belief system is often not built through explicit conversation. It's built through absorbed narrative. Through the stories, children hear about who they are and what's possible. A Winnie the Pooh quote, emotionally encoded at age 6, can be functioning as a psychological resource at age 26. The Lion King gives us something equally powerful. Rafiki's line to Simba, "Yes, the past can hurt, but the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it," is a textbook description of what cognitive behavioral therapists call cognitive reappraisal. This is the ability to take a painful experience and consciously reframe its meaning. Psychologists consider it one of the highest order emotional regulation skills a person can develop. It is actively taught in trauma therapy. And here it is, delivered by an animated mandrill with a walking stick, to every child who ever watched that movie. What research on emotional regulation shows is that children who develop the language and the internal framework for reappraisal early, children who have been given the concept, even if only through story, show significantly lower rates of anxiety and depression in adolescence. Because when something hard happens to them, they don't just experience the pain. They have a cognitive move available. They have a question they can ask themselves. Can I run from this, or can I learn from it? That question was given to them by a movie. Pocahontas tells us that sometimes the right path is not the easiest one. Psychologists would recognize this immediately as delay of gratification priming, preparing the brain to tolerate discomfort in the service of something meaningful. Walter Mischel's longitudinal research, which tracked children from the famous marshmallow test all the way into adulthood, found that the ability to tolerate short-term discomfort for long-term reward was one of the strongest predictors of life outcomes ever measured. Academic achievement, relationship quality, physical health, financial stability, all correlated with this one capacity. And one of the ways children develop that capacity is by having a narrative framework for it. A story that says the hard road is sometimes the right road. That's what Pocahontas is quietly doing. And then there's Buzz Lightyear. Not flying, falling with style. That line is easy to laugh at, but look at what it's actually teaching. It's teaching resilience reframing, the ability to take a failure, a literal fall, and reconstruct its meaning, to find agency and even humor inside a loss. This is exactly what psychologists mean when they talk about post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where people who experience setbacks don't just return to baseline, they develop new strengths as a direct result of the difficulty. Children who are given the narrative language for reframing failure, who have absorbed somewhere in their emotional memory that you can fall with style, are building a psychological immune system. Brave gives us one more. You are the one who decides your own fate. You don't need magic to do it. Merida says this to her mother at the end of the film, but it's really being said to every child in the audience. And what it encodes is something psychologists call internal locus of control, the belief that your outcomes are determined by your actions, not by luck or external forces beyond your reach. Research by Julian Rotter, who developed the concept in the 1950s, and decades of follow-up studies have shown that children with a strong internal locus of control handle adversity better, persist longer, and develop higher self-esteem. They don't feel acted upon by the world. They feel capable of acting on it. That belief starts somewhere. Sometimes it starts in a darkened room, watching a red-haired princess fight for her own story. Finding Nemo's Dory gives us the simplest and perhaps the most durable of all: just keep swimming. It sounds almost too simple, but research on grit, pioneered by Angela Duckworth at the University of Pennsylvania, identifies perseverance of effort as the single trait most strongly associated with long-term achievement, more than talent, more than intelligence, more than socioeconomic background. And perseverance is not just a behavior, it's a belief. The belief that continuing is worth it, that the next stroke matters even when you can't see the destination. That is what Dory is encoding in 3 words into the emotional memory of every child who watches her swim through that dark ocean. Now here's the question you might be asking. If children absorb all of this passively, If the narrative transportation is happening automatically, why does it matter what you do as a parent? Why not just press play and let the movie do its work? Because passive absorption and active consolidation are not the same thing. Neuroscience tells us that memories are not static recordings. Every time a memory is recalled and engaged with, it goes through a process called reconsolidation. It gets rewritten slightly, strengthened, and made more available. What this means is that a memory that is never recalled tends to fade or remain dormant. A memory that is recalled and discussed becomes a more robust, more accessible part of the person's cognitive architecture. There's also another layer here that most parents miss completely. The emotional encoding your child experiences during a movie is powerful on its own, but it's anonymous. It's the child and the screen alone. When a parent is present and says something, even something small, the experience becomes relational. And relational experiences are encoded differently in the brain. They go deeper. They're tagged neurologically with the emotional signature of connection. Which means the value in the quote gets bound up with the safety of the relationship. The idea and the love arrive together. This is why research on intergenerational transmission of values consistently finds that the most durable values children carry into adulthood are not the ones that were lectured at them, but the ones that were lived in front of them and shared in small, ordinary moments. Movie night is one of those moments. It doesn't feel like values transmission. It feels like Tuesday. But the brain doesn't distinguish. When you sit next to your child during the movie, when you pause after a meaningful moment and ask, "What do you think that means?" you are activating reconsolidation. You are taking the emotional encoding that happened in the moment and making it permanent. You are building a neural pathway that says this idea is important. This is something worth returning to. And it doesn't require a lecture. It doesn't require sitting down and explaining cognitive reappraisal theory to a 7-year-old. It requires one question, one moment of presence, one acknowledgement that what just happened on screen was real, that it was worth something. The next morning, mentioning it again over breakfast does the same thing. Remember what Mufasa said? I've been thinking about that. That one sentence tells your child's brain, this idea lives in our house. This is part of who we are. Some parents worry that doing this too often will feel forced, that it will break the magic of the movie for the child. The research says the opposite. Studies on shared media experience, parents and children watching together and discussing, consistently show that children report enjoying the movie more when a parent is engaged with them, not less. The discussion doesn't dilute the experience, it deepens it. The child feels seen, not taught at. And the ideas land harder because they arrived inside a moment of warmth, rather than instruction. The quotes that go viral, the ones that stop adults mid-scroll and make them feel something they haven't felt in years, they go viral for a reason. They carry real psychological truth. They are not accidents of good writing. They are the distilled wisdom of human experience, encoded in stories simple enough for children and deep enough to last a lifetime. Your child is sitting in front of these stories right now. Their brain is open. The encoding is already happening. The only question is whether you'll be there to make it stick. You don't need a psychology degree to do this. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need to know that the movie matters, that the moment matters, that you, sitting there in the dark, saying almost nothing, maybe just one question, might be doing some of the most important parenting of your child's entire life.